January 13th, 2025. Dawn breaks over Prayagraj, India, and the first pilgrims wade into the Ganges River at the Triveni Sangam, the sacred confluence where three rivers meet. Steam rises off the cold water as thousands of devotees immerse themselves, cupping the holy water in their palms and pouring it over their heads, whispering prayers that have echoed here for millennia. Women in bright saris float marigold garlands downstream, while priests chant mantras on wooden platforms built over the water. This is the Maha Kumbh Mela, the largest religious gathering in human history, and over the next 6 weeks, somewhere between 450 and 660 million people will bathe in these waters seeking spiritual purification. What they won't see is the invisible threat swimming alongside them: fecal coliform bacteria at levels reaching 49,000 mpn per 100 milliliters, roughly 20 times what's considered safe for human contact. At one drainage point nearby, contamination hits 9.2 million mpn per 100 milliliters, which is 4,000 times the safe limit. The pilgrims don't care. One man tells journalists, "Ganga is our mother. Drinking her water is our fate. If you have faith, you are safe." His words capture the impossible contradiction that defines this river. How do you save a goddess who's dying from the very devotion meant to honor her? 500 million people depend on the Ganges for water, and the river carries fecal bacteria levels up to 40,000 times above safe limits. This is how one of the world's holiest rivers became one of its most polluted. The Ganges starts as glacial meltwater at Gangotri Glacier in the Himalayas, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, where ice transforms into the Bhagirathi River. At Devprayag, the Bhagirathi meets the Alaknanda River and officially becomes the Ganga, beginning a 2,525-kilometer journey through 5 Indian states before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. The drainage basin covers over 1 million square kilometers, roughly 1/4 of India's entire territory, forming the world's largest river delta where it meets the sea. Between 400 and 500 million people live in this basin, depending on the river for drinking water, irrigation, industry, and spiritual sustenance. That's 40% of India's population served by a single waterway, and more than 1/3 of India's surface water flows through this system. Among those 500 million people, 200 million exist below the poverty line, making the Ganges not just a lifeline, but often the only line. Major cities punctuate the river's path: Haridwar, where it emerges from the mountains as the sacred gateway; Kanpur, with its 400 tanneries pumping chemical waste into the current; Prayagraj, where 3 rivers converge in Hinduism's holiest confluence; Varanasi, where the faithful come to die on the banks ensuring moksha; and finally, Kolkata, before the delta spreads into Bangladesh. But calling the Ganges a river misses the point entirely. In Hinduism, Ganga is worshipped as a goddess, a divine being who descended from heaven to purify the ashes of King Sagara's 60,000 sons after the sage Bhagiratha performed 1,000 years of penance to bring her to earth. Lord Shiva caught her in his hair to break the fall that would have shattered the world. Every drop of Gangajal, Ganges water, carries this divine purity regardless of what science measures in it. India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru wrote in his will, "The Ganga is the river of India, beloved of her people, round which are intertwined her racial memories, her hopes and fears, her songs of triumph, her victories and her defeats." When you understand that over 70 million Hindu pilgrims visit the river annually to wash away sins, when you realize that dying on its banks guarantees liberation from the endless cycle of rebirth, you start to see the problem. This isn't just environmental policy, it's theology crashing into microbiology. Sewage dominates the pollution load at roughly 75% of total contamination, and the numbers reveal why cleanup has proven so difficult. The Ganges Basin generates 72,368 million liters of sewage every single day, but treatment capacity exists for only 37% of that volume. 60% enters the river completely untreated, and 97 municipalities dump approximately 750 million liters of untreated sewage directly into the Ganges daily. Varanasi illustrates the scale of the problem. The holiest city on the river generates between 230 and 410 million liters of sewage per day, and for years only about 200 million liters could be treated, while millions of pilgrims bathed in water mixed with the remainder. Industrial pollution accounts for just 12% of waste volume but delivers disproportionate toxicity through non-biodegradable chemicals, and Kanpur stands as the worst offender. Over 400 tanneries employ 50,000 workers, producing leather goods worth about $540 million annually, with 95% exported to the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany. Every day, these facilities discharge between 5.8 and 8.8 million liters of toxic wastewater into the Ganges, carrying chromium levels exceeding safe maximums by over 70 times, cadmium running 18 to 58 times above WHO limits, and lead reaching 4 to 24 times above safe levels. One tributary, called the Pandu River, shows copper concentrations 1,000 times higher than normal before it even reaches the Ganges. In January 2019, authorities ordered between 91 and 94 tanneries to shut down for polluting, but the economic reality complicates enforcement. Effluent treatment costs surged from 2 rupees per hide to over 100 rupees per hide, devastating for an industry competing on global markets. Religious practices add their own burden in ways most outsiders don't expect. At Varanasi alone, somewhere between 25,000 and 40,000 bodies are cremated annually, which breaks down to 80 to 200 bodies burned every single day around the clock at just 2 main cremation sites. Each cremation requires 200 to 400 kilograms of wood, sometimes up to 500 kilograms for larger bodies, but traditional cremation costs around $60 to $70 compared to about $6 for electric cremation. Many families can't afford complete cremation. About 300 tons of half-burnt bodies, bones and flesh enter the river annually, with some estimates putting partially cremated or unburnt bodies at around 100,000 per year. Electric crematoriums handle only 5 to 7 bodies daily, barely making a dent. Agricultural runoff layers on top of everything else, since the Ganges basin accounts for 27% of India's total pesticide use, roughly 21,000 metric tons annually. Every day, 6 million tons of fertilizer and 9,000 tons of pesticides wash into the river from surrounding farmland, carrying DDT, organophosphates, and endosulfan downstream. A 2006 study in Varanasi documented what everyone suspected, but nobody wanted to quantify. 66% of people living along the riverside contracted a waterborne disease within 1 year. Among fishing communities, that number jumped to between 76 and 96%, and these weren't minor illnesses. The study documented 33 cases of cholera among families who bathed or washed in the Ganges, compared to 0 cases in unexposed families. Nationally, waterborne diseases affect 37.7 million Indians annually. And in 2015 alone, 117,000 children under 5 died from diarrhea in India, representing 13% of all under 5 deaths. Across India, over 300,000 children die annually from contaminated water, with a significant portion linked to the Ganges basin, where documented diseases include cholera, typhoid, dysentery, hepatitis A, and severe diarrhea. A 2012 study by India's National Cancer Registry program found that people living along the Ganges in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal are more prone to cancer than anywhere else in India, linked to heavy metal exposure from chromium, cadmium, lead, and arsenic that has increased several-fold over the last decade. And then there's the superbug problem. In 2008, antibiotic-resistant bacteria called NDM1 and NDM4 developed in the Ganges, and by 2010, the World Health Organization issued a warning about them. These superbugs represent bacteria that have evolved resistance to even our most powerful antibiotics, bred in the pharmaceutical waste and untreated sewage that flows through the river. The fecal coliform numbers defy comprehension. Safe limits for bathing are 2,500 mpn per 100 milliliters, but in Varanasi during peak pollution in 2006, levels reached 100 million mpn per 100 milliliters. That's 40,000 times above the safe limit, and as recently as 2019 and 2020 in Bihar, levels hit 160,000, which is 64 times the safe limit. Waterborne diseases cost India about $600 million annually, and overall health costs from water pollution run about 3% of India's GDP, somewhere between $6.7 and $8.7 billion every year, with 73 million working days lost annually. January 14, 1986, marks the government's first serious attempt to save the river when Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi launched the Ganga Action Plan at Rajendra Prasad Ghat in Varanasi. Standing on the same banks where millions came seeking purity, Gandhi announced a budget of 462 crore rupees to build sewage treatment infrastructure across 25 major towns and create 865 million litres per day of treatment capacity. Engineers drew up plans, contracts were signed, and construction began on what was supposed to be India's environmental redemption. Treatment plants rose along the river, pumping stations were installed, and sewerage networks expanded through ancient cities that had never had proper sanitation. But the Ganga Action Plan failed spectacularly, and the reasons reveal why fixing the Ganges has proven nearly impossible. In Kanpur, they built a pumping station that sat idle from day one because nobody noticed the treatment plant was constructed at a lower elevation than the river itself, meaning gravity sewers couldn't carry the discharge uphill. Another treatment plant kept discharging untreated water because constant power failures knocked it offline, and the backup generator was too small to handle the load. In Varanasi, planners underestimated sewage by 50 million litres per day because they excluded the Varuna River from their calculations entirely. March 31, 2000 marked the official closure of the Ganga Action Plan, and the river was no cleaner than it had been in 1986. Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched the Namami Gange program in June 2014 with a much bigger vision and a much bigger budget, 20,000 crore rupees for 2014 to 2021, with Phase 2 adding another 22,500 crore for 2021 to 2026. Total budget, 42,500 crore rupees, roughly $5.1 billion US, dwarfing anything attempted before. At his victory speech in Varanasi in 2014, Modi made it personal. "Ma Ganga has called me. She decided some responsibilities for me. Ma Ganga is screaming for help. She is saying, I hope one of my sons gets me out of this filth." The program divided into 4 pillars: Nirmal Ganga for pollution abatement, Avral Ganga for ecological flow, Jan Ganga for community engagement, and Gyan Ganga for research and policy. By October 2025, the program had sanctioned 513 projects worth 42,019 crore rupees, with 344 completed. Treatment capacity of 6,761 million litres per day had been sanctioned, with 3,806 million litres per day operational, and they'd laid about 5,213 kilometers of sewerage network. In December 2022, the United Nations selected Namami Gange as one of the top 10 world restoration flagships at the climate conference in Montreal, bringing international recognition. But auditors told a different story. A 2017 report by India's Comptroller and Auditor General revealed that only 8 to 63% of funds were being utilized depending on the state, and over 2,100 crore rupees sat unused while the program struggled with a 44 to 65% manpower shortage. As of June 2024, only 48% of the sanctioned budget had been spent, 18,033 crore out of 37,550 crore. A World Bank official put it bluntly in 2011, "Experience elsewhere has shown that river cleanup is a long-term and costly enterprise. The cleaning of the Rhine took almost 20 years and more than 40 billion euros. The Rhine had one advantage the Ganges doesn't. The countries sharing it weren't simultaneously treating it as the physical manifestation of a goddess. The Ganges river dolphin, India's national aquatic animal, tells the environmental story in a way statistics can't capture. Population numbers stood between 4,000 and 5,000 in the early 1980s, but by 2024, only about 2,600 to 6,300 remain, depending on whose numbers you trust, though even the government's higher estimate represents a dramatic decline. The species is listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List, and dolphins have gone extinct entirely in parts of the Yamuna, Ken, Betwa, and recently the Barak River, with their habitat range declining nearly 20% since the 1800s. fisheries have collapsed across the board. In Allahabad, major carp populations declined 91% between the 1960s and the 2000s, and the Hilsa migratory fish saw a 99.4% decline in Patna, essentially commercial extinction. The Ganges supports 143 documented fish species, representing 20% of India's freshwater species, and 29 of those species are now listed as threatened. The gharial crocodile is critically endangered, and 450 medicinal plant species dependent on the river ecosystem face similar pressures. What you see when you visit the Ganges today depends entirely on where you stand. At Gangotri near the source, the water runs clear and cold from glacial melt, exactly as pilgrims imagine the entire river. Move downstream to Kanpur and the water turns murky brown, sometimes black, near industrial outfalls with a chemical smell that stings the nostrils. At Varanasi, the cremation ghats release steady streams of ash and half-burnt wood into the current, while thousands bathe just meters away. Some progress has been reported. pH and dissolved oxygen now meet bathing criteria at all locations according to government monitoring, and Uttar Pradesh claims 68.8% improvement in water quality compared to 2023, but problem areas remain in Kanpur, Mirzapur, and other industrial zones where enforcement proves difficult. The fundamental math hasn't changed since 1986. The basin generates about 12,000 million liters of sewage daily, while treatment capacity stands at only 4,000 to 6,000 million liters per day, meaning 97 municipalities are still dumping roughly 750 million liters of untreated sewage into the river every single day. Between January and February 2025, the Maha Kumbh Festival brought somewhere between 450 and 660 million pilgrims to Prayagraj in what organizers called the largest religious gathering in history, and the government spent 17,000 crore rupees to host it. When India's Central Pollution Control Board published findings showing fecal coliform levels at certain locations reaching 49,000 mpn per 100 milliliters, roughly 20 times the safe limit, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath, dismissed the reports entirely. He claimed the water was clean enough to consume and called the findings an attempt to malign the event, which captures the tension that makes the Ganges unique among environmental crises. One devotee interviewed by the New York Times said it perfectly. "Ganga is our mother. Drinking her water is our fate. If you have faith, you are safe." A Hindu holy man offered a different perspective. India is killing its own mother. Both things are true. The Ganges is dying from the very civilization it sustains, poisoned by the cities that worship it, contaminated by the industries that feed off its abundance, and overwhelmed by the devotion that draws hundreds of millions to bathe in its waters. And yet, that same civilization considers the river too sacred to die, believes in a purity that transcends bacterial counts and heavy metal concentrations. Over 40 years and more than $6 billion later, the Ganges remains one of the world's most polluted major rivers, while also remaining one of the world's most sacred. The question isn't whether India can afford to clean the Ganges anymore, not after spending billions and seeing minimal results. The question is whether India can afford not to, because 500 million people are counting on that answer, and Mother Ganga, as the pilgrims at the Maha Kumbh will tell you, she's still calling.